Living in Ireland is worse than you think. Once hailed as the Celtic Tiger, an economic miracle of the 1990s, a country that transformed from one of Europe's poorest to one of its wealthiest. Today, the housing market is broken. Homelessness is at record levels, and the cost of living is climbing beyond the reach of many. The very things that made Ireland attractive, its economy, its lifestyle, are now under pressure. But how did it come to this? What happened to the country that once seemed like a model of prosperity? Why a nation at a crossroads, where the dream of homeownership is slipping away for an entire generation? The heart of Ireland's modern struggles lies in its housing market. What was once a beacon of affordable homeownership has now become a nearly impossible dream for most citizens. The residential property market has spiraled out of control. According to recent data from the Residential Property Price Index, house prices in Ireland have increased by 7.94% in May 2025 alone. Dublin, traditionally a city where housing was at least somewhat attainable, now sees median house prices that have surged beyond €450,000, up from €267,000 just 9 years ago. That's a jaw-dropping 70% increase in under a decade. Outside Dublin, the price growth isn't any better. Prices in counties like Cork, Limerick, and Galway have risen by an average of 8.7% year on year. Despite construction efforts ramping up, the supply of new homes remains insufficient. The Economic and Social Research Institute estimates that Ireland will only complete 33,000 new homes in 2025, well below the 52,000 required annually to meet growing demand. With more and more people flooding into cities for work and better opportunities, the lack of housing stock is only getting worse. The government has promised €4.5 billion for housing development in 2025, but experts argue that this isn't enough to make a real impact. In fact, many believe the situation could become catastrophic if construction doesn't increase at a much faster pace. The Irish dream of homeownership is quickly slipping away for many families. In order to afford a home in Dublin, a person would need to earn at least €128,000 annually. That's over 3 times the average wage in Ireland. Even with dual incomes, many families simply cannot keep up with the rising prices. Meanwhile, rents in cities like Dublin have now skyrocketed. A one-bedroom apartment in the capital can cost between €2,500 and €2,540 per month, leaving many young people with the stark reality that renting is now their only option, and buying is out of reach. As the housing market becomes more and more unaffordable, Ireland's homelessness crisis has reached dire levels. In July 2025, Ireland's homeless population reached a historic 15,915, including 5,014 children. This is a staggering 11.3% increase from the previous year and reflects the sheer scale of the problem. The worst part? These numbers only represent those who are in emergency accommodations, and the actual number of homeless people is likely even higher, with many sleeping rough on the streets of Dublin and other major cities. Family homelessness is one of the most distressing aspects of this crisis. In June 2025, 2,230 families were homeless in Ireland, up from 1,130 in 2016. This alarming rise points to the collapse of the traditional family homeownership model, which was once a symbol of Irish stability. Today, families are being pushed into temporary accommodations, often living in cramped, poor-quality spaces. It's not just an issue for those on the lowest rungs of society. Middle-class families, too, are struggling to find stable homes. The Irish government has been criticised for its handling of the homelessness crisis. The Simon communities in Ireland have voiced concern over the inadequacy of emergency accommodation spaces. The government's promise to build 300,000 homes by 2030 is a step in the right direction, but many feel that this is too little, too late. At current rates, it would take years to catch up with the massive backlog of housing demand. Ireland's population is growing rapidly, but this growth, driven largely by immigration, is putting an additional strain on its already fragile infrastructure. While immigration has driven economic growth, the side effects are becoming impossible to ignore. Between 2023 and 2024, Ireland's population grew by an impressive 79,300 people, driven primarily by net migration. With immigration exceeding 100,000 people every year for the past 3 years, the country's population is rising at an unsustainable rate. 80% of this growth is accounted for by new immigrants, with the largest number coming from countries like Poland, Romania, and now increasingly Syria and Ukraine. In fact, about 31,500 Irish citizens returned home in 2024, a sign of renewed economic attraction. The influx of people is undoubtedly contributing to Ireland's housing woes. As more people arrive, the demand for housing has far outstripped supply. Public services such as healthcare, education, and transportation are already struggling to keep up with demand. According to the Irish Health Service Executive, waiting times for hospital treatments have more than doubled over the past 5 years, with some patients waiting over 18 months for essential procedures. The increasing strain on services adds to public frustration, especially among citizens who feel that immigrants are being prioritized over locals. While Ireland has long prided itself on its welcoming attitude towards immigrants, the rapid influx of people is causing a shift in public opinion. A 2023 survey revealed that 29% of the Irish public now sees immigration as the most pressing issue facing the country, a sharp increase from just 4% the previous year. Tensions are running high, especially in local communities where refugees and asylum seekers are being housed in already overburdened areas. The government's plans to place 280 asylum seekers in a small village of 165 residents in 2024 sparked outrage among locals. The infrastructure in these small towns is simply not designed to support such a large influx, and the backlash has been intense. Beyond housing, the cost of living in Ireland is rising at an alarming rate, pushing many families to the brink. The Living Wage Technical Group for 2025 and 2026 has set the living wage at €15.40 per hour, a 4.4% increase from the previous year. This represents the minimum amount an individual needs to earn to afford a basic standard of living. However, even with this increase, many families are struggling to make ends meet. As wages have stagnated, the cost of housing, food, and other essentials has continued to rise, making it nearly impossible for people to live comfortably. The Consumer Price Index shows that prices for food, transportation, and utilities have spiked by as much as 5.1% in 2025. For example, a weekly grocery shop now costs €135, up from €120 just 1 year ago. Gas and electricity bills are another major source of strain, with energy costs increasing by 6% year on year. In cities like Dublin, the combination of soaring rent and utility costs means that many households are spending up to 60% of their monthly income just to stay afloat. For a typical family of 4 in Ireland, monthly expenses are nearing €5,500, which includes housing, food, utilities, and other living costs. This is well beyond the reach of many, with the majority of families relying on one or more credit lines to survive. As housing costs continue to rise, young people are delaying buying homes and starting families. In 2025, the average age for first-time buyers is now 36, compared to 28 in the early 2000s. In an effort to tackle Ireland's growing housing crisis, the Irish government introduced the Housing for All plan, which aims to deliver 300,000 homes by 2030. This ambitious initiative is designed to address the critical housing shortage and provide affordable homes for an increasingly larger population. According to the Department of Housing, over 13,000 new homes were delivered in 2024 alone, but this is far from meeting the necessary demand. As Minister for Housing Darragh O'Brien noted, Ireland needs to be building around 35,000 homes annually to keep up with current and projected demand. However, critics argue that while the plan is promising on paper, it lacks the multi-annual funding commitments needed for long-term sustainability. The Housing Alliance, which represents a coalition of housing organizations, has repeatedly stressed that clear policy and robust funding frameworks are essential for success. Without a steady stream of financing and stronger political will, the plan risks being another well-intended initiative that falters in its execution. They also point to the lack of affordable housing options and the growing gap between the number of homes being built and the number required to meet current demands. One of the key obstacles to increasing housing supply is Ireland's complex planning system. Central Bank Governor Gabriel Makhlouf recently emphasized that planning rules remain a critical barrier in meeting housing targets. Ireland's planning laws, which were originally designed to protect environmental standards, have been criticized for being too bureaucratic and slow, making it harder for developers to secure permits for new projects. The Irish Property Owners Association has also called for streamlined planning processes, pointing out that delays in the approval of construction projects have only exacerbated the housing shortage. According to recent reports from the Central Statistics Office, housing completions in Ireland fell 12% short of the national target for 2024, largely due to lengthy planning reviews and regulatory hurdles. Experts believe that simplifying these processes could drastically accelerate the delivery of new homes. Moreover, the construction industry faces significant skills shortages, with trade labor becoming increasingly scarce, further complicating efforts to meet housing demand. For instance, CIF, Construction Industry Federation, estimates that 18,000 new workers need to be trained in the next 5 years to avoid a construction labor shortage. Ireland finds itself at a defining moment. The country faces a convergence of crises, escalating housing prices, surging homelessness, a growing population due to high immigration, and a steadily increasing cost of living. While the Irish government has introduced several initiatives, including the Housing for All plan, to tackle these pressing issues, the road ahead remains fraught with challenges. The success of these measures will hinge not only on timely implementation and adequate funding, but also on a comprehensive, coordinated approach that addresses the interconnected nature of the housing crisis. Without reforms to streamline the planning system, boost housing construction, and support middle-class families in securing homes, Ireland risks facing prolonged social and economic instability. Additionally, the growing divide between urban and rural areas, especially in housing affordability, has the potential to deepen regional inequalities. As the population continues to grow and more people look to Ireland as a place of opportunity, the country stands at a crossroads. Will it act decisively, or will the forces of rising costs, slow policy execution, and systemic inefficiencies derail its future? The coming years will determine whether Ireland can reclaim its reputation as a land of opportunity for all, or if it will be remembered for letting its prosperity slip away.